Welcome to the S.J. Child Show, where a little bit of knowledge can turn fear into understanding. Enjoy the show. Hi, welcome to the S.J. Child Show. Today, I'm really looking forward to getting into this conversation with Dr. Theresa Haskins. And I met her through, you probably already heard me say Harry's name in several other podcasts because she's just such a great connector. And thank you so much, Harry, for introducing us. And thank you, Theresa, for your time today and being here with us.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having me. Harry is a great connector.
Yeah, isn't she though? And it's her passion. She has many passions, but you feel the passion when you are connecting with her. And she says, "Oh, I have this great people I want you to meet." And then she sends you 7 emails and you're like, "Wow, how did I have so many, so many appointments to make now?" So she's keeping me on my toes, which I greatly appreciate. Sometimes being neurodivergent myself, I can get a little bit squirrel and be chasing off ideas around the house. So yeah, I appreciate being kind of kept on track sometimes. Give us a little bit of introduction about yourself and kind of what brought you here today.
Well, the invite is what brought me here today, but what connected Harry and I is that we both have twice exceptional children. And so my journey into the world of neurodiversity, which actually started with autism inclusion, really starts with my son. So he was growing atypically in terms of the developmental milestones that we would think that children would hit right from the pediatrician's perspective. But there were things that were just being blatantly ignored that we noticed, like his ability to count to 100 or know his ABCs at the age of 1. But he didn't wave or say mommy. And so we knew that there was intelligence there, even though he wasn't performing, for the lack of a better word, the way others would want him to. And so if you fast forward a little bit, he just always had this precarious ability to learn. He's had access to a computer since the age of 2. That's much thanks to the great work of Sagata Mitra and the whole the wall experience, where he showed that if you put computers and gave access to the children in the slums, they were able to teach themselves. And so since I had this child that was pretty certain was reading and showing early abilities to write, that the computer was going to be his gateway. And it proved to be true. Mm. By the age of 3 or 4, he had broken into PBS Kids' website. One day I was trying to teach him how to write, right? Because I knew he could identify his letters. And it looked like he was writing an alien language, which really got me concerned, so much that I called my husband over because I kept trying to get Braden. It was the word frog, trying to get him to write the word frog. He was 3. I know that's early for other people thinking about when a child would be writing the word frog, but this is Braden we're talking about. And he was writing this weird looking script, and Brian saw it and he's font. And then he goes to Wingdings 1 and changes it. Braden had memorized Wingdings. He did write the word frog, just not in the script that I could identify. So, you have this bright, late talking child. So then you're starting to read the books of Thomas Sowell. And like, what about bright, late talking children? He was diagnosed as PDD-NOS because this is back in the days of the DSM-4. So his intelligence, based on how autism diagnosis happens in childhood, is a quasi-intelligence test, which is not fair because intelligence has nothing to do with autism. So because of his precocious abilities, it kind of diminished his deficits, which really were quite significant in terms of him not communicating in a reciprocal way. And he was not talking. He could speak, but he was not talking, right? I mean, obviously he could say his ABCs, so he had the ability to form words, And it wouldn't be until he would have a speech therapist. I'm telling this really long story because, everybody introduces me as Dr. Theresa Haskins, but in some ways it's because I'm Dr. Mom. I did not have my doctorate when Braden was born. But what I did see very quickly is huge gaps in the system. And I think about my friend Marie Martin in the UK that's always talking about gaps in their system and not having the right supports and send. And I tie her into this because when he was still 3 or 4 years old and just getting his diagnosis, I'm like, you know what? I need to find a way to better support my child. It's kind of at that early career stage where I didn't really know what I wanted to do in life. So I thought, I'm going to become a special educator. I love helping people. I want to help people like my son. I would only get through one semester of that program before I would realize that there are some serious flaws in what people are being taught on how to help these children. And I said, who comes up with this? And there was a word after that I won't say on your podcast. Teacher told me educational psychologists. And I go, but this stuff isn't right. I go, it might work for some, but this would not work with my kid. I would never do this. It's wrong. ABA was a big part of that, right? There was a lot of things I just didn't like. And he's like, as an educator in the state of Ohio, you would be bound to leverage the practices that are evidence-based. This is what you have to do. I go, so who decides this again? And so he's like, and I go, how do I become one of those? So met with the professor, transferred to a new school, ended up getting my master's in educational psychology. Fast forward a few years later, Braden's 6 years old. And I think I went to school. I don't know about you, right? So you just anticipate that your children's going to go to school because it's what you know. And so we're talking to the educational psychologist and he does the intelligence test. They stop it after 3 days because Braden could have went further, but it was high enough for our state standards. So they capped him. I won't say the number, but at a pretty higher than bright number. And so that we were meeting with the kindergarten teacher, the first, second, third grade, we're all there with this educational psychologist. And I'm like, so what are we going to do for Braden? Because he was already doing basic physics at this point. He's 5. He was in a skip program where he was with like typical and special needs students to get like some social activity. He would read to the class. This is something all the teachers knew. So if this was the case, what are you going to teach my child? Because he's teaching other children. He's 5. But he had some social deficits, significant. And so the educational psychologist goes, I understand your son's Bryce, but I really recommend he goes into kindergarten because he socially is significantly behind. It was the 3rd grade teacher said, but what are we going to do with him all day? So then I said, well, what about if he goes to school and then like maybe in the afternoons he could take a physics class? They're like, we can't send a 5-year-old to the high school. So my husband and I left that meeting and decided that we were going to have to learn how to homeschool. I knew he was bright. I was almost done with my degree, so I knew I was, more than qualified to create a homeschooling program, and started on the journey of figuring it out as we go and following his lead. That's really what we did. I don't want to call it unschooling because it was definitely intentional, but he loved learning. Like I didn't have to say, oh, let's do math today because he reads dictionaries. He enjoys it. Like it's a different human being to work with. So you fast forward to today, and I'm Dr. Theresa Haskins. I'm Dr. Mom. And this happened because while all this is happening, and we come up with a path to educate my son. And then my youngest son, we decided to just homeschool him too, because Braden was doing stuff on the computer and the baby was picking it up. So he was early to read and he was early to write. And when Braden was bored with some of the software we would buy him for learning, little Brock would start doing it. So we knew he was bright too. We didn't even go through the stuff with the school. We just said, we're going to do our own thing. So this brings us to most of my focus is actually not on helping students become educated, because while I think it's really important, my story is so unique to my students' abilities. My students' abilities, because they're my children too. They're unique to my children's abilities. But while all this was happening, I also have been working in corporate America and with government entities this entire time. And, when they were 5 or 6, you kind of had that concern, will they be able to get an education? Right. And so that's why, I was going to be a special educator and I'm going to be an educational psychologist, which I am. But then I realized they're probably going to enter college early. And that's where Harry and I connected, because Braden entered college at socially. He could have done it earlier, but he entered at 14. My younger one started at 12. Braden tested into Calculus 1 at 14. So not concerned about their ability to get an education, not even a little. But what does have me concerned is I see these brilliant children I have that are growing into these, what I think are fabulous young men. And I work with entities that would never hire them. And it was around the time where the big companies were talking about these autism at work programs, and Rising Tide was showing up, and there's tons of them. Popcorn for the People, from like entry-level work all the way to the most competitive jobs in the world, like at NASA. We started to hear this crescendo that maybe we need to address this issue for autism inclusion. But knowing what I know, working inside the bowels of a company for so long, I know that one of the things that needed to be addressed was to stop focusing on individuals fixing themselves to ready themselves for corporate America, but for somebody's, because it can't be one person, it's too big, for somebody's to start looking at what is the universal construct that we need in talent management in corporate America, because it is not on the individual to install ramps or buy software. Like, we have to start figuring out what are the constructs that are required for them to be included too, that the ADA and other initiatives do not spell out with any sort of certainty. So that's when I went to get my doctorate, because I thought, I mean, it was just kind of how I was raised, that you have to have a credential to be listened to, which in hindsight isn't true, but it did prove a few things. Having a platform and not just basing my opinions on my lived experience or my children's lived experience, but have talking to hundreds of autistic individuals, just as many families, sometimes same families, sometimes separate, and then working with more organizations that I'm allowed to name, has allowed me to start seeing where there is a pattern and a consistency of things that we can actually scale. So a lot of times people are like, how did you get your son to do what he did? That's not the question. The question is, how can you work within a system to meet your child where they are? Because our journeys and our problems aren't the same, but the barriers to entry are.
That environment,
so that's
you have to create that.
Right.
Isn't that the truth?
So I'm not looking at accommodations and how you can support my child specifically. I'm looking at what is the construct in your structure, in your culture, in your ways of working with people that creates the barrier to need the accommodation in the first place. And it's a very different way of looking at it, because it puts the onus on the employer, which is the exact opposite of what you're hearing about advocate for yourself. Sarah, if you used a mobility device and you came up to a building and then asked for them to install a ramp, it's a little too late. But that's what we're asking our neurodivergent population to do. You're not ready for me, right? Would you have a guest? Like, think about if you had a dinner party and you had a guest to your home, and it's Thanksgiving's coming. And so you make all of your fixings like you do. And a lot of Thanksgiving dishes are meat-based. And it's at the party that you determine there's a vegetarian. Even if you're willing to make a different dish, you've already communicated you don't belong here. So we need to be more proactive. We need to know our guests. We need to know our potential employees, and you need to ready your home for their inclusion, because who is it, Brené Brown, always talking about belonging. You don't get belonging if I ask for it. Mm. You just told me I don't belong here because I had to ask you to include me. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's me. That's how I've come to be. And it was a journey of need. Mm. But I think that the lived experience informs the problem. I think, and it's much like if you're angry about anything, it's that stepping back and trying to see it from the most objective lens, to take the emotion out and the unfairness out and really look at what's really happening. Because I don't think people are inherently bad. But I'm looking at this, like an ASPCA thing, right? We all know there's dogs in shelters. We all know you shouldn't buy a puppy because it encourages puppy mills. How many people do you know buy a puppy?
Yeah.
I thought we all agreed that shelters are a problem and puppy mills are bad. So I think we have the same problem in this space. I talk to people and they philosophically get it. They agree. Somebody should do something.
No changes are being made. Mm-hmm.
They're not making the change. Oh, you should hire somebody with autism. That somebody should do that. So that's where I'm at, Sarah. We are at that precipice of finding ways to increase the accountability to, for the lack of a better word, force the change. And I think the late diagnosed autistic crowd gives a larger voice to the scale of the issue. As long as they're working towards, and most are, looking at the systemic barriers so that we can eradicate them, so that we can actually get to the population that was part of those statistics. Because if you think about it, our late diagnosed friends are not even part of the statistics.
Right.
They're not being followed by the CDC. They were not captured at the age of 8. So when you think about the statistics you and I use, and then we add this whole other population, our generation, that's not even accounted for. I'm not a mathematician, but that's a much bigger problem.
Agreed. Yeah.
Right?
No, I completely.
So that's me.
That. Yeah.
That's a very long story to introduce me. But it is this, well, then welcome, neurodivergent friends. But it's one of those things that to say, oh, this is who I am. And, so on paper, right, if you Google me, I'm a professor at the University of Southern California. I teach in their Masters of Human Research Management program. Why? Because I want to be able to influence the next, or not just next generation. Every cohort is a potential student will be a future HR leader that I might be able to make more diversity minded, with neurodiversity in mind. I work with government entities. I obviously have my own podcast, and I do all these things because, and, I'm talking to you, and I work with Harry, and there's, Theo, and all these great people. And we need each other because this is not a one-person problem. And what's beautiful is we're not even all coming at it from the same angle. Yeah. And if you really believe that neurodiversity is a spectrum, I just ask you to pause and go, autism's a spectrum. Just trying to solve for the breadth of autistic problems across the spectrum. And I think people need to be a little more honest about that spectrum, because there is a brilliant superpower side. There is a profoundly impacted, will never live independent side. And then there's everybody in between. That's why it's a spectrum. So we can't ignore those sides. And I think caregivers get a short end of the stick on the level 3 side. And then you look at neurodiversity, and then you have to think about how does that funnel up and relate to, but it's different than ADHD and Tourette's and mental health conditions. Where does giftedness come in? And hey, folks, giftedness isn't even recognized by the American Psychological Society because they don't see it as a problem. So because it's not a problem.
Yeah. Right.
You're brilliant. How could you have a deficit, right? And so I think that people like me and you and the rest of you that are listening out there, we need to come together. And when we feel that a conversation doesn't include us, we add ourselves as the addendum. We don't create adversity of the exception. Because that's not helping anything. So if you're hearing my story and you're like, well, my son's not going to enter, or daughter isn't going to enter college at 11, and I don't have the resources to homeschool like you did. My husband, if you're wondering, how did she work full time and do all this? My husband implemented the programs. He had the harder job to do that. I know, teachers, I see you. But it's all these things that, if you have to use the system, I am not blind to that plight. I know that there is this a level of privilege for the path I chose to take. There was some sacrifice, significant sacrifices that my husband and I made to make that path. That's our choice. And it's just as well for your choice. And the truth is if you have a child and you want to go through the school system, the truth is they should be better equipped to support you. You shouldn't have to be penalized or go on your own or go get 800 degrees like Theresa did to help your kid. Like my story, it's like, oh, wow, look what you did. Yeah, but why did I have to do that?
Right.
I shouldn't. I'm like proud of what I achieved, but at the same time can be a little bit angry that this is what I had to do to help my children.
Yeah. No, I can understand that. I won't give my whole story because then my listeners will be like, oh gosh, no, just joking. But there's so many things that resonate. You won't even believe it. From the early writing and reading, or reading at one, I did the Your Baby Could Read program with the little CDs and the DVDs and the flashcards. And so there was a tracking availability and measurability on the reading, and the same PDS, PDD-NOS diagnosis, the same writing at 2. Languages, we got into multiple languages very early, and the same finishing, when we were in 5th grade, or excuse me, 1st grade, when we entered 1st grade, and the school said, we cannot teach him algebra at 5 years old or 6 years old. We don't offer that. And same thing made us, I had to come home, I had to create. And I said to them, are you kidding me? You're all teachers. How are you all you all had algebra. I know you did. I know, you know how, like, even if you're not good at it, you've all had it. How can you not have programs available? Do you think my son will be the only child in existence this is ever going to come up? You're doing a disservice for not only me, but for all of the other children behind us that are going to be coming for this to happen. And I'm sure there still is no programs in that school available. And I didn't, like you, I just kind of removed myself from society almost, and took this like 2 or 3 year huge depression. Let's talk about how you feel completely isolated and disappointed in society. And especially, I don't know about you, sounds like it, went to school and had all the opportunities. So why can't my child do this? And it's just this overwhelming sense of gone wrong. Things gone wrong. Like, this is not the way it should have been, should be in the future. And, I didn't go and get degrees. However, being a paralegal, researched and continue to research continuously all the time. And so I think that same level of keeping your education going, no matter what that means to you, whether it is listening to podcasts, doing research, learning, like you said, from the voices and mouths of autistics, from the writings of non-speaking autistics who can communicate their feelings, can communicate their intent and their desires to have a life that is free of people speaking at them and doing with them, not for them. And it's such a huge, huge deficit in our society, especially when we get into multicultural and other countries and stuff. In the United States, we're so lucky, and not as lucky as maybe even some, it feels like the UK is so far further ahead. Some things when I see there, yeah, it's like, exactly. But it wasn't, and here we are. Like my son is going to be 14 in 3 weeks. He's finished high school 2 years ago. We haven't. I don't know what to do. This is where Harry came into the picture, is that I had no idea. Of course, I've known he was twice exceptional, profoundly gifted his whole life, but I didn't know that there was a community. I didn't know that there were these programs and these people that I could connect with that would understand my exact story. And I could tell them, yeah, well, I remember when he was 2 and wasn't speaking till he was 4, and he was doing these computer spelling quizzes where he'd have to fill in the blanks for escalator. And I'm like, are you kidding? Like, how is this even possible? And then it just, yeah, it's overwhelming. But the amazing part, how you and I could come to leadership, come into empowerment, and realize the steps that needed to be taken were steps to move forward, not steps to look back, or what can we fix? What is in the past that we needed to fix? We need to fix what's in the future. And there's so much. What is something we can do today, just as parents or as human beings, to take a step forward for this next generation that's going to be coming out? And I'm sure there's going to be a zillion more,
I think you said it best, that knowledge is power. And for anybody listening to this today, Braden's going to be 17. So 17 years ago, the internet was still pretty archaic, right? A decade before that, I mean, Google was just being invented, like, let's be honest. So the community wasn't there, not because it didn't exist, but we didn't have a way to find each other. Mm-hmm. So that's number one. Number two, when you have a twice exceptional or gifted, we'll just lean that way, child, their abilities are so astonishing that it's hard to believe that anybody else could have a child like yours. And that's not a selfish or pride thing. It's just, it's beyond anything you've seen. It's beyond anything anybody else knows. Like, I'm going to share, it's a little bit of a brag. I don't normally do it, but it was about a year ago that we heard my youngest son, because I'm always talking twice exceptional about my oldest, but my youngest is actually twice exceptional, late diagnosed twice exceptional, guys, just to let you know. So he was diagnosed with ADHD a few years ago. I knew he was bright, but the reason why I know he's twice exceptional without the intelligence test is we heard him playing the piano. We have a piano. And he's playing Chopin. He's never had a piano lesson. So now he's playing Liszt, and he doesn't even know, but I Googled it. Half the repertoire required to even get into Juilliard. He's 14 years old. He's never had a piano lesson. When you see something like that, you think, wow, this is a 1 in a billion. There's nobody like me. And that's what the point of the story, friends, is yes, there is. I guarantee somebody listening to this might ping into your show and go, Theresa, my son's playing the piano like that too. I mean, if you read stories, Mozart did it. Yeah. So it's not unheard of. And so that would be the first one. If you think you're unique, your child is unique and special, and they are the only one of them that will ever exist. So I'm not denying that. But you're not as alone as you think you are. You're just isolated within your community.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I think if I could tell any parents anything, is that when you find you have this extremely bright child and your pediatrician's like, well, that's great, but they're not potty trained, right? Like, they're worried on a different list. Like, I did a podcast on, redefining I call it a success trap, because there's like, your developmental checklist is based on norms. And what I need parents not to do is A, doubt their own intelligence and doubt themselves about what they see. But B, don't get mad at professionals who are using the checklist that they're required to use. The problem with the checklist is these are the things that the typical child are going to hit first. My son had a wonderful pediatrician that around the time, he was missing some of the desired developmental milestones, right? Like, being able to use a toilet and stuff. Like, as parents, we all can't kind of wait for that moment. And I remember talking to the pediatrician, and she said, he's on a different developmental timeline. So here's my advice, and it's not probably what you're expecting, Sarah. What people need to understand is the brain can only learn so much at a time. And where parents get trapped is you and I are telling these stories about how great and how amazing our kids were, that they were reading, writing, and doing all these things. But when you talk to anybody else, you talk to your doctor, you talk to the teachers, you talk to their friends, their kids are walking and talking. Their kids have learned how to throw a ball. Their kids are checking off the publicized checklist. So you say, yeah, but my 1-year-old knows the ABCs. 1 year and not the other, because that's not on anybody's radar.
Yeah.
And they don't, and it's so weird that if you have like a 1 or 2-year-old that's typical, and you hear about a child that's doing these ABCs, and that parent tells you, they're like, oh, well, they think they're so great, but their kid can't even tie their shoes. Yeah, well, your kid can tie their shoes, but they don't know their ABCs. By the way, neither one's better.
Yeah.
They just have a different, so we called it an asynchronous development checklist, because she's like, well, other children are mastering some of their motory and physical and communication, sensory type skills, right? They learn like a baby's an id until they get their ego, right? It's all about they scream and cry because they're hungry, right? And over time, they get control over that. And then you get control of your bodily functions. And then most humans start from the social component, because that's how they connect with humans and get it through. Well, if autism is real, which it is, that is the disability. Sorry, folks, I'm going to use that word. And it's a disability because the way we develop and interact as humans, that is atypical. It doesn't make it bad, but it is atypical. It is not on the checklist that 95% of the population can use successfully.
Yeah.
That doesn't make it wrong, but it definitely means it's not being accounted for. And so if you're on this separate checklist, you as a parent need to do a really good job for yourself to start to rectify those differences for yourself. And I have to be honest, my son he's being mentored by one of the professors at the university. He's doing theoretical mathematics. This is something that's senior and graduate level work, guys. I can't tell you that when I see people posting on Facebook about homes, prom and girlfriends, that there's not something amiss. And why is that? Because that was my reality of normal.
Yeah.
That's what I experienced. I don't know his life.
Yeah.
I can't even begin to fully appreciate it. Frankly, none of us can.
No.
Because we're not him. And what brings him joy isn't even on most people's radar. So,
not true.
I did say this to the educational psychologist before we went home to homeschool him. And he's like, his advice to me, and he was not kidding, he needs to learn to integrate with other people or he's going to be alone. And I said, no offense to anybody in the local area, I'm pretty certain Braden's not going to be hanging at BW3's drinking a beer when he's 18. I have a feeling he's going to run with a little bit different circle.
Mm-hmm.
I say that and everybody's agreeing. Parents, you have to actually internalize that and believe it. Because the entire world, 95% of them or more, I'm just making up that statistic, do not quote me on that, folks. But the majority of the population is using the same measuring sticks. Their kids play little league sports. They go to prom. They're getting their license at 16. Do all of these things have to happen on those timelines? Absolutely not. Does it happen for the majority of people? Did it happen for you that way? Probably. So your child sticks out. And you will have family, and you will have teachers, and you will have I say they are well-intentioned people. Well, I don't know how your child's going to develop if they've never played sports. I don't know how your child's going to make friends if they're not in a regular school. And maybe they're not even ready for that yet.
Yeah, exactly.
So while your child hasn't mastered calculus and physics, but has mastered developing friendships, maybe our children are just on a different timeline. And it doesn't mean they won't get there.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at 30-year-olds with autism, with average to high intelligence, and 30-year-olds without autism and similar intelligence, you do start to see things start to equalize because the milestones start to slow down and our children have time to catch up on those normative milestones.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing, but I like in the crowd with a bit older children with autism, I'm starting to hear that, you know, they're getting their license in their 30s, but it's not because they're going to get there. They're getting there in their timeline.
Yeah.
But they also got a double doctorate before they got there.
Exactly.
Right? Where most typical
Mm-hmm.
people are just starting their doctorates like in their late 20s and 30s. So it's just a different timeline.
Yeah.
And your job, parents of these amazing children, is to not get bullied by the norms and to not get down by being different. And it could be so much as not sharing so much with others. And I know that that feels weird, but if you have family that doesn't get it, trying to force them to understand could be more detrimental than just appreciating we're on different journeys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Find people like me and Sarah to talk about your problems with. Find people like me and Sarah and Harry, and I can throw out a bunch of names now, Julie and Beth, and that people that get it so that you feel seen.
Yeah.
Because we've all been there. The reason why you have the friends you have, the reason why you chose your partner or spouse, if you think about it in your adult life, you choose your circle. I mean, you may be related to people, but the people you see on the regular are not usually blood relatives. It's people you choose.
Yeah.
I think autistic children just start earlier
Yeah.
on their individual path of, right? Like in school, we all take the same classes. By 20, we all have specialties. Autistic children just start as a specialty.
Yep. I love it.
Day one.
Yeah.
And by the way, we all do it later. When we cast out, you know, when we turn 18, you're officially an adult, I guess, so they say. Some are going to be plumbers and some will be doctors and some go into science. All of a sudden you can be an individual. It's the craziest thing. And all of a sudden you don't have to be good at math. You could be good at art.
Right.
Right. Wait, what just happened to the last 12 years of my life?
Yeah.
And why did I have to take so much history again?
Yeah. Oh, not the truth. Oh my
So
goodness.
that it's not the advice, because people are usually like, they want that practical, like, well, how do I advocate for my child in school? And how do I get them the supports that they need? So here's what you do. See what your school can and can't do. Read books like Sarah's and find internet resources. Get your IEPs. Find a doctor who may not fully understand you, but at least respects and supports you.
Yes.
Find the school counselor that may not fully get you, but respects and supports you. There's two key words there. They don't have to understand it. They do need to respect it and be willing to find solutions. My biggest problem is we have a deficit-based model and everybody is focused on what somebody can't do. And we do that. Well, we do it at work too, but we do it in education horribly.
Yeah.
And then you get to like 11th grade and you meet a guidance counselor that's like, you should really focus on computers because that's what you're good at.
Yeah.
If you can find somebody that can help focus, like I think Montessori schools, they're not perfect, but they're a little better at saying, oh, you're interested in trains and incorporating that concept in every subject they do.
Mm.
It's those little nuances of customization that could make or break the success of your kid.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah. And you're right about that. Now they're so lucky nowadays to have computers to be able to offer the information and the just diverse experience that they can just immerse themselves in 100%. And I remember the plant encyclopedia, the plant encyclopedia, it's like 12 inches thick. It's got plants of every name, of every letter you've ever seen in the world. And yeah, now now I think it's being used as a nightstand or book stand rather than as a book, because the internet is available and he can look up any name of anything. But no, the amazing resources that are available to us now, just like Dr. Haskins here and her amazing ideas and thought processes and experiences that we can really draw from. And I appreciate your realism and your just really organic understanding and explanation of how you perceive, the world and these amazing children and adults that are out there that we just praise. And like you said, think this is the smartest person I've ever known in my whole life, and you give all of this to them. And at the same time, I always used to joke that, your kid has his whole life to go to the bathroom and your kid has their whole life to eat a sandwich. So when they're little like that and they're struggling, like, just remember that you do come back, here 10, 20 years later, and you look back and say, wow, so much has happened. So much has changed. Thank goodness that, we're out of pull-ups finally at age 7. But yes, right. It's a journey.
That was the age.
Yep, mine too.
That was
It's
the
a
age.
journey. We could speak Italian, French, German, and Russian, but going potty on the potty, don't you even think about it.
My son was Googling plutonium, and that will be a book someday.
Yeah.
You said something, and this is advice that I think you and I can give a parent. There are things you expect. Like, we say that we're going to like follow our children's lead. And if you are pregnant or were pregnant or have a child, we're all guilty of it. You thought you knew what that baby was going to be like. You thought what baby was going to be like, what they might grow up to be. I was convinced I was going to have girls. I had boys, right? And I didn't want to find out. So they were surprises. But
me too.
It was the whole idea. I think that's just the best way to do it. It's
Me
surprise after work, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I actually just had this conversation with somebody today because their child will only eat crunchy foods and milk. And by crunchy foods, I mean like crackers. So like no nutritional value. And, she's getting a lot of flack for this, or the child is actually growing up a bit. And she goes, I don't know what to do. And I said, I'm going to give you advice that a doctor gave my mother about her own children many years ago. And he goes, if all they're eating is cookies and milk, will they eat nuts in their cookies? Can you make an oatmeal cookie with raisins? He goes, are they physically eating something? She's like, yeah, but they need to be eating other things. He goes, who said that? He goes, I know a nutritionist would be, but right now it's just getting food in their body. So parents, you need to stop pushing your expectations of normal on your children. And you don't think you are. You're like, oh, they need to be healthy. If your child is thriving, if they're hitting weight milestones, these are the ones that matter. If they're happy, except when you're fighting with them to eat something they don't want to eat. If they're not going to the bathroom like you would want, or not learning how to potty train, but they just mastered playing Minecraft, you are actually the one that needs to kind of assess,
Yeah.
oh my God, I'm pushing expectations on your children. And by the way, parents, I'm not saying you can't set goals and have expectations, but don't do it to the point where you actually start to treat your child or see them as a deficit. You either believe in the asynchronous concept of developmental milestones or you don't. You can't say you do and then be like, but they need to learn how to sit still and they need to eat what I say. So this person said, how did I get my children to eat? And I go, well, when I found foods that I thought they would like. So in this case, I said, will they eat Rice Krispie treats? And she's like, yeah. I go, okay. Will they eat do they like the flavor of nuts when they're eating crunchy things? So I said, let's start small. What's the whitest nut you can find? Yes, parents, we always talk about not hiding things in food, but as the parent, you can, because you already know your child's allergies. You never hide food on strangers, but you can definitely hide food. Sorry, parents, there's probably people that don't like this, but I said, shop up macadamia nuts. I'm allergic to peanuts, so I never recommend those, but maybe peanuts. I don't know. I guess they're probably the right color for Rice Krispie treats, but I go grind it like a powder. I go, first of all, Rice Krispies is a cereal. So if you can add some nuts, or he likes dried cherries, I go, just start making him a variety of Rice Krispie bars. Who cares what anybody else thinks about how he's eating it? I think Temple Grandin ate Jell-O for like the first 10 years of her life. She lived.
Here she is. Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So yes. And by the way, that my brother who, sorry, tell your story, who, was eating cookies and nothing else, will eat anything now.
Yeah.
He is the palate of champions. So it's the whole idea of the problem today may or not be a problem tomorrow. If they're eating and they're thriving, I get it. I don't want to cook 10 meals. It's not an easy path, but it's definitely a solvable one.
Yeah.
So your kid eats pasta every day. That's okay. I have a friend who has a child eat white foods.
Yeah. Us too. Potato chips every day, all day, potato chips. And you try to find the healthy ones, when you can. And sometimes you won't eat them because they taste way different than the other ones you like. But at the same time, he only drinks water. Okay. Well, then I'll be happy that he doesn't want sugary sodas and that he just wants water. And I'll try to sneak in some gummy vitamins. I found some gummy worms that are vitamin gummy worms. And he's like so excited to eat a gummy worm. I'm like, thank you, vitamin companies. If they'd only do that with medicine now, if they could only make a lollipop for him to have an Advil or something so that I could get him to have medicine. But yeah, there's so many things we still need to work on out there for inclusivity and really understanding the needs and accommodations of not only our community, but so many others in society. So it's been, I can't believe how much time has gone by. It's been such a pleasure and a wonderful conversation, a wonderful hour to spend with you. Thank you so much. Can you please tell everyone where they could go to find out more about you? If you have a website or any, you said you had a podcast. Tell us where to go.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn at Dr. Theresa Haskins. My website is www.theresahaskins.com. So fairly simple, Theresa with an H, Theresa. I do have a podcast. We just ended the season today. It was a 15 episode season. It's called Think Differently with Dr. Theresa Haskins, where I actually, I'm exploring concepts that I challenge our views on how we think about it today. So like what it means to be disabled. And so if you're curious about what I mean by that, then you might want to tune in, but, or just reach out to Sarah. If you're ever trying to look for support, but Google's your friend and we are findable. So, happy to take any questions you ever have. And I know that Sarah and myself, we are a welcoming community network. If you feel alone, don't. If you feel alone, reach out so you don't have to feel alone that way. I think it was one of the most comforting things to happen when I started to realize the first time I ran into somebody with a similar story, I thought I had found a unicorn.
Yeah.
To my surprise, I would meet 10 others. And that's when you realize that there is this community out there. It's not an anomaly. I didn't just meet somebody serendipitously, but we're out there. So don't be alone. And we may not know your specific situation. We may not know your specific school system, but we can definitely give you some pointers to help you make your own path to success for you and your child.
Thank you so, so much for your time today. It's been so much fun. And I know we're going to keep in touch. We have so much more to talk about, I'm sure. I feel it. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. And listeners, check back in and we will see you on the next podcast.